Wonderful. Are we good?
I think so. Let me just, yes.
Okay, great. I'm going to go ahead and call the March 23rd Business Advisory Committee to order. And we will start with call of the roll. So Chelsea Newdenkamp, present. We'll go members of the committee.
Suzanne Dirksen, present.
Josh Newell, present.
Members of council.
Othaniel Sierra, present.
And city staff.
Sean Lewis, present.
Jenny
Sorry,
Nolan,
Jenny.
present.
And Pieter Van Ry. I'm the Director of Utilities in South Platte Renew.
And I think Jackie is trying to join us, so she should be here momentarily.
Okay. And then other attendees.
This is Carol Molesky from Stantec.
This is Dion Rao from Stantec as well.
Wonderful. I don't see Director Lowe yet. So we will move on with approval of the minutes from our February 23rd meeting. Do I have a motion to approve the minutes?
I have a minor adjustment. It looks like we still have Steve listed as the chair.
In the minutes?
Yes.
Oh, well, that's odd. I will adjust that. I don't even know how that happened.
Good catch, Suzanne.
Thank you,
Otherwise,
Suzanne.
I move to approve the minutes.
Is there a second?
I second, assuming that change is incorporated.
Wonderful. Any opposed?
No.
Great. We will, all in favor say aye. I should actually
Aye.
Aye. All right. We have those minutes approved. And we are now supposed to move to comments from Councilmember Ward, but I do not see him on the call. Did he confirm his attendance, Jenny? Do you know when we sent him the invite?
Let me check.
He had requested to be here.
Right.
And I think he just wanted to say farewell.
Mm-hmm.
It's part of the meeting.
Yeah, we went ahead and adjusted the agenda for that to happen.
I don't, I see that the invite went out to him, but I don't see that he is confirmed.
Okay. Well, I think we will just move on as my recommendation, and then if he joins us, he can make his comments then. Any other suggestions from the committee?
I'm in favor of moving forward for the time being.
And I'll email him in the meantime.
Great. I know he's getting all set up on his new city email and all that stuff, so I just wanted to make sure he got it. Since I know he had specifically wanted to be here. Wonderful. Well, with that, thank you so much, Dr. Van Ry, for being here. I believe this is the first time your department has presented to the Budget Advisory Committee. And I think for most of us, we're really looking forward to hearing what you have to say. Obviously, there's a lot of implications for costs for both the city and for residents. And so we are really looking forward to your presentation this evening. With that, we will give you the floor and we look forward to learning from you.
Well, great. Well, thank you very much. And thank you for having us. This is, yes, this is my first time presenting to this board or this committee. And with me tonight, I have two people from Stantec Consulting who have been our consultant for about the last year and a half, helping us through this process of really looking at our rates and fees and how we assess water and sewer rates and fees specifically. And so tonight I'll be talking about water and sewer only. That's what we have under the utilities department. And we have a presentation. There's a lot of information. There's a lot of slides in this presentation. We're going to go through it rather quickly because it's going to be somewhat of an overview. If there's any point in time where there's something you'd like to us to go back and look at, we can definitely do that. But we're gonna throw a lot of information at you because this is essentially a summary of what's occurred over the last about year to year and a half as it relates to getting us to the point where we have a solid base for establishing rates and fees for water and sewer and associated increases that have been approved by council. And so if we can pull up the PowerPoint, which I think so Siwan with Stantec and Carol Molesky, who both introduced themselves, have been helping us for quite some time. Siwan's going to actually run the PowerPoint, and then I'll be sharing the presentation between the three of us, and we'll go from there. So we'll probably have a couple spots where you can potentially take a stop and take a break and for questions, but we'll do this in a few different phases and really have an opportunity for you to see everything that we've done. So with that, let's talk through what we're gonna go through tonight. So the first step in all of this process is developing a master plan, which we'll go through that process. Then we take that information and it feeds into a rate study, which then develops financial plans, cost of service and rate design and connection fees. And then ultimately we have ongoing initiatives that we were working on in 2021 and beyond that we'll touch on as well. So the first step is to really take a step back and understand the state of the water and utility system as they are today. And so if you look back on the timeline, in September of 2019, we issued a contract to Hazen, which is a consulting firm, to help us do that high-level assessment. And so we analyzed all the available data that we had. We did field visits. We evaluated the major assets. There were workshops. And essentially, we ended up doing a high-level categorization of the water and the sewer system as they are today, to help us understand the condition and the needs so that we could then develop a corresponding plan. Next slide. How we prioritized that plan was based on risk. And so there's 2 points that we look at. It's the likelihood of failure and the consequence of failure. And so what we want to do is we want to eliminate as much of the upper right as possible, which is the red, and then move towards so that we're largely green to the degree that we can. So the high priority is what we anticipate needing to initiate projects on those types of issues in the next 1 to 2 years. Medium priority was 3 to 5 years, and long range is 6 to 15 years. We first presented this to council in April of last year, so we are a year into that high priority phase, and to give you an idea where we are. Next slide. So essentially we looked at the water system first. This is a quick overview of the water system. You can see we have McClellan Reservoir to the south. There's a pump station. That's one of our critical pump stations that pumps water either into McClellan Reservoir or other places through the system. Union Ave pump station actually pumps water from the South Platte near Union Ave to the Allen treatment plant. We also have what's it's not as shown in here, but the city ditch is one of our major conveyance structures that comes from Chatfield to the Allen treatment plant. That conveys water as well. And you can see we have a couple other tanks and pump stations through the system. Next slide. This is what we're looking at. We're looking at the existing equipment, things that are deteriorating and corroding, large electrical. There's a lot of these systems have significant electrical equipment because they're big pumps and they're big power supplies. And so you can see in the one picture where we've got water leaking and impacting a large electrical cabinet. And so really it's understanding how these systems are in terms of their condition. You can see the rust on the left. Next slide. We take all that and essentially develop a list of projects based on priority. And you can see on this list, and this is where we're going to go kind of fast. I'm not going to go through every project, but you can see some of the major projects are the pump stations. So a lot of those pump stations have original equipment from the 60s. And so they've been maintained, and there's been deferred maintenance on them. And we're finally at a point now where we need to replace those pump stations in order to have reliable pumping ability into the future. If we lose these pump stations, in some instances, we lose the ability to move our raw water to the treatment plant, which is a critical supply function. Electrical, there's a lot of electrical work that needs to be done. You can see that's $2.5 million. There's pump station improvements in the distribution system as well. That's a couple million. And then you can see as the projects move farther down, they're smaller in budget, but they're still also specific important projects that we need to work on. Next slide. So then we have a 3 to 5 year range. You can see there's still more work in the distribution pump system pump stations, phase 2. We have more electrical work. There's a significant amount of electrical that is out of date that we are working to revamp. The transmission main out near the hospital that's on the list. That actually is one that coordinates with a streets project, and then just other projects on the list. And then next slide, please. And then we look farther out, so 6 to 15 years. So we looked for a total of 15 years. And you can see there's some overhead tank work that needs to be done. Those eventually need to be replaced. There's work on a softening. Softening is a big issue that people have an issue with Englewood water. I'm sure many of you have, if you've got a stainless steel refrigerator like I do, I've got spots on it from where I take water out of my refrigerator. And but you can see that some of these are pretty substantial projects that we have on the plan for the next several years, for the 6 to 15 years out. Next slide, please. So in addition to discrete projects, there's a number of programs. So these are more annual programs. And what you can see is these are the recurring programs that are operations and maintenance based to help us ensure that the systems are functioning properly and being maintained on a less reactive basis and a more proactive basis. And so you can see a few of the examples here. On-call emergency service contracts. We've actually just established 2 of those to help with water line breaks. And so when we get a number of water line breaks, now we can call a contractor to help offset the load that our staff experiences as it relates to water line breaks. And then there's hydrant flushing and testing, valve inspection and exercising. There's just a number of things that within the actual systems we want to pay attention to and ensure that we're maintaining. Next slide. These are, once we get those first programs in place, these are the next round of programs that make sense to put in place. And one of the most significant ones you can see on the top there is water main replacement. So what we would like to do is get in a program where over the course of 50 to 70 years, we're replacing the whole water line system. And so that means we want to be replacing 1 to 2% per year in order to ensure that we don't ignore it for a long period of time and then all of a sudden have several areas of the system that need to be replaced. Additionally, a lot of the mains in Englewood are original install. We have a lot of 4-inch mains. We have a lot of 6-inch mains. And anything that we'd be putting in new would be an 8-inch main because we want to have that better conveyance to serve customers. Next slide. And then some of the longer term programs, one of the most significant of which is the lead service line replacement project. So we have the estimate is we have somewhere between 4,000 and 8,000 lead service lines within the city. And the first step is really understanding what that number truly is. And so we're working on a program to identify and prioritize the longer term replacement of those lead service lines. This is an issue that Denver has just wrestled with over the last 3 years or so, and it'll be coming from a regulatory perspective to Englewood in the near future. There will be a regulatory driver. We anticipate sometime in the next 3 to 5 years that will require us to have a program in place. Next slide. Some of the policy items that we considered in the master plan, universal metering. We still have 1,272 flat rate accounts, which are accounts that basically are non-metered water accounts. So we're looking at, we want to get to a point where we're on all meters. That helps from a water conservation perspective. It helps from a customer perspective in terms of understanding what their water usage is and billing. And in a lot of cases, the flat rate costs, a customer could actually reduce their water bill by being on a meter as opposed to being on a flat rate. So that's one of the things that we have a program in place to fix. Talked about lead service lines. We have water hardness that I talked about, and then main replacements. So these are some of the larger policy items and programs that we need guidance in terms of how we move forward and as we develop a strategy. Next slide. On the sewer side, this is the sewer collection system for Englewood is actually the northern 2/3 of the city is managed by the city of Englewood. The southern 2/3, where you can see there are no green lines, is actually the South Englewood Sanitation District. We actually have a few other places throughout the city, not nearly as large as South Englewood Sanitation District, that also provide contract sewer service for City of Englewood customers. And so it's a unique thing about our collection system that makes it a little bit more, it's just a different type of challenge as it relates to managing that collection system and programming funding for it. The most significant driver of the sewer fund is South Platte Renew, which is the regional wastewater facility that's co-owned between Littleton and Englewood. And so we'll get to more of the costs related to that a little bit later down. Next slide, please. So some of the findings through the master plan through that project was really it's a matter of programs. There's not a lot of discrete projects because it's really the sewer collection system is really the network of 8 and 12 and 15-inch pipes. And from our initial observations, we didn't have any projects that jumped out. What we need to do is we need to do a CCTV inspection. And so that's a videoing of the entire network. And that will then give us whether we have projects that we need to focus our attention on in terms of rehab or replacement of those lines. Next slide, please. Some of the broader programs are main rehabilitation and manhole rehabilitation. With sewer, what we want to do as much as possible is not dig it up. We want to rehab what's in place. And so there's lining technologies and there's coating technologies that we can put in place to really rehab the sewer system in a way that limits the amount of disruption to the street. Next slide. And then eventually we want to get a handle on things like how much inflow do we have. Inflow costs money as it relates to treatment. So if we're treating rainwater, that costs more money than if we're not. So the more we can tighten the system, the better off we'll be. Next slide. So South Platte Renew has its own master plan and capital plan that has been developed, and you can see the numbers are much larger, and that's because South Platte Renew serves the Southwest Metro region, 300,000 citizens. The two cities, Littleton and Englewood, are the co-owners, and then there are 19 connector districts that are served through the two cities, and that's why you see the numbers so much larger. It's the third largest wastewater plant in the state, and so the capital needs are just much more significant because of the size of the facility. But you can see there the 1 to 2 year, 3 to 5 year, and 6 to 15 year projects that were identified in that master plan, with a grand total of $235 million over the next 15 years. Next slide, please. So the summary of the 15-year budget cost for water, grand total is about $168 million. And then on the sewer side, it's around $60 million. And so that is all of the information that was the backbone for now for helping to then build the rates and fees that Siwan and Carol will be discussing next. I think that's the next slide, right? There we go.
That is. Thank you, Peter. And thank you all, members of the committee and members of council, for giving us the opportunity to come talk to you about our rate study and your rate study. So the first thing I wanted to go over is basically, in case you haven't been part of a rate study process before, we have specific goals for the process. First, we want to know how much to recover through the process. It's called revenue sufficiency. We need to make sure that we're getting at that sustainable amount of revenue that the water and sewer funds need to recover each year for the long term. So we want to make sure that we're taking care of financial policies that are used to set targets for the amount of revenue collected and the amount of expenditures. We also want to make sure that we're accounting for all of that system investment that Peter talked about. The second step is, from whom do we collect all this revenue? It's a significant amount of revenue each year, and we go through a defensible allocation process that we don't make up. We use guidelines from the American Water Works Association and the Water Environment Federation. So there are set steps that we take to allocate costs across all of the customers of the system. And then finally, how do we collect the revenues that are needed? That's through calculating simple, equitable, and sustainable rates. Now, simple is probably relative, but we try to make it as straightforward as possible so that the customer can understand what they're paying and what they're paying for, that the utilities, that the funds recover revenue on a stable basis over time, and also that customers know what they're getting when they're paying their rates. In our study, so the next slide, please, shows how many steps we went through. And some of you might be familiar with these steps. You've seen some of the outcomes from these already, and some of the slides that we will show will look familiar. But we started with task 2. Well, we started with task 1, the project initiation, but task 2 through task 9 all are needed to come up with the recommendations and the presentations of tables and graphs in support of the fees that we are talking about, the rates and fees. So we go through a financial planning process, a cost of service process, rate development. We looked at a rate survey that we'll show you in a little bit. We looked at, on the sewer side, the connector agreements. So the connector districts, they are an important part of your customer base. And then we've also looked at some miscellaneous fees. So these tasks all work together to come up with the recommendations for water and sewer rates. While Peter just talked about the results of the master plan, when we first dropped those values into our long-term planning tool that you'll see in a minute, the actual impact on rates was fairly significant. So the team with the city worked on looking at those projects and the timing of those projects to see if adjustments could be made that would be more manageable from a funding perspective and from a rate impact perspective. The information that we then included on the water side was about $61 million over the 10-year period. So that was an average capital expenditure of $5.6 million each year. On the sewer side, it was a little higher because of the mix between the South Platte Renew treatment needs and then the collection system needs. So in total, that was about $98 million over the 10-year period, or $8.9 million a year. That's pretty significant capital expenditures. So that is one of the things that we refined as we worked through the analysis. On the next slide, we show the financial planning process. So this is really the first step where we worked with your staff to go through a dynamic modeling process. C1 is actually going to demonstrate this model, but I wanted you to just get an idea of what goes into the financial plan. It is an iterative process, as I mentioned. We look at the impacts on the financials and on the operating results for many things. One of them happens to be additional staffing needs. That's just one of the many elements that go into the costs or the revenue requirements of the system. So we looked at a lot of the operations and maintenance costs. We looked at forecasting those costs over the 10-year period. And then we also looked at the CIP or capital improvement costs and all of the funding options that could be considered when you're trying to minimize the rate impact on ratepayers. That is our ultimate goal. We wanted to minimize the overall increases. That's a very quick review, but I think it would be better if C1 showed you how the model is prepared and what kinds of things we can do, what kinds of scenarios we can run with that model. So C1, if you want to take over the demo, that would be great.
Yep. Thank you so much. So let me exit out of this. And, are you able to see the presentation? I'm sorry, the model?
Yes, we can.
Okay, perfect. Perfect. So like Carol said, this is the financial planning model we've created. It's exactly the same snapshot that you saw in the PowerPoint. I'm going to zoom in a little bit. We're currently on the panel tab. So this is where we see everything, how everything comes together. And this is a 10-year model. We've created one for the water fund, for the city's water fund. We've created another one for the city's sewer fund as well. And essentially what we've done in this model is a 10-year model since we started it in 2020. So it goes from 2020 through 2030. So every year we looked at, we try and capture all the historical actuals and budgets for revenues and expenses, incorporate all the cost and revenue data into our model, and then use 2020 as a basis to forecast going forward so we can know that every year, how much does it cost to operate the water fund? How much revenue do we need to collect to cover those revenues, and the rate adjustments needed in case when one year the revenues is not enough to cover the expenses. And I'm gonna come back to this panel, but before I would just want to go through some of the key inputs tabs within this model, just so you have an idea of what everything that goes into this model. So we use 2020 as our basis, as our beginning year. So the first thing that goes into the model is to try and capture, as end of year 2019 or beginning year of 2020, how much funds available do we have on the water side. And we do the same exercise on the sewer side as well. So we look at the financial reports, we look at general ledgers to get an idea of cash and investments that we have available in the water fund. So this would be the pot of money that we can use for our daily expenditures, for our operating and maintenance costs, for our debt service payments, for our capital improvement program costs, and so on. And so beginning of 2020, we're looking at about $17 million in the water fund that we could use. And then the next key input tab that we have is where we capture all of our revenue sources. So if I zoom in a little bit, in the top section, this is where we capture our water rate revenues. So that's our most majority of where our revenues are. So these are the rate revenues that customers pay for their admin fee, their monthly fixed charge, and then also a water volumetric rate. So historically, we try and capture the budget versus actual. These information will be used to forecast going forward. Since we're currently in 2021, we're looking at collecting about 6.5, so $6.5 million in water rate revenue. And we also have a few miscellaneous revenues as well. So we have interest incomes, we have our water connection fee charges that we're going to talk about in a little bit. We have some raw water sales, city ditch revenue. So these are all just miscellaneous revenues outside of rate revenues that we would collect. So if we're looking forward, going forward in total, for the rate revenues and also the rate revenues and also other revenues combined, we're looking at about $12 million per year. So now that we know how much we're forecasting to collect in our revenues, we also want to capture all of the costs that would incur within the water system. So this is a detailed line item budget that we got from the city that captures all of the different accounts, the different division, and the different line items for operating and maintenance costs. So we have our salaries within the the source and supply division. We have our benefits. We have insurance. We have utility costs, electricity costs, bulk chemical costs. So all of the costs that are captured within here for operating the water system. And again, we try and capture historical budget versus actual for 17, 18, and 19. And then we have a 2020 budget numbers. And then also now that we're in 2021, this is something that we've incorporated into our model as well for 2021 budget. And going forward, we typically, you can see that with the line item, costs do increase. We typically include some type of cost inflation factor to account for inflation going forward annually. And in this case, we've talked about different escalation factors for benefits and salaries versus chemicals versus insurances. These are the things that we've identified to apply different escalation factors going forward. And the cost goes out to 2030. We don't have any transfers in this case. Another cost another thing that the city currently has two outstanding debt. We have our 2019 water geo general obligation note, and then we have a water geo refunding bond. So every year, the city is paying about almost $1 million in debt service payments. And one of the things when we go back to the panel is we want to make sure that we have enough money every year to cover all of our O&M costs, to cover all of our debt service, but also make sure that we are meeting our debt service coverage requirements. So that's one of the financial target that we're trying to meet every year. And then lastly, the very last tab that I want to show you is the CIP tab. So it stands for Capital Improvement Program. This is where we track all of our capital expenses, which is from what Peter was talking about. We ran through iterations of different scenarios of the different master plan projects to include in here. We've looked at deferring certain project costs, certain project schedules, and make adjustments to project costs. And this is where basically where we tracked all of our capital needs every year and how we're funding them. So essentially for the different projects, there are a mix of different funding options. So we could either be cash funding a project, we could be debt funding a project, and in this case, over here, it shows OPT, which means optimized. So what it means is it will go through each of the capital projects and look at if the city has the money available to cash fund it. So that it will use the fund balance the city has first, and if the city runs out of money, and then we will go out and borrow to fund the project needs. So that's the logic behind how the projects are funded. So now that I went through really quickly about all the different key inputs tabs. So if we come back to the panel, this is where we can look at how everything comes together. So we've captured all of the revenues that we think the city will collect in the next 10 years. We've included all the different O&M costs, the debt service payments, the capital improvement program costs. And so how do we know if the city is able to afford it? So if I stay to the top here, this row 10 and 11, this is where we show our rate adjustments for the next 10 years. And this is a smooth plan already. This is typically where we spend a lot of the time with the city to run different scenarios. And the very first thing that we typically start with is, what does it look like if the city if we don't have any rate increases in the next 10 years. So I'm just going to put in 0% for the next 10 years. I'm going to calculate the model. And you will notice that these graphs will change. And I'll explain what changed. I'm going to calculate it now. Okay. So now that you can see with the 0% rate increases, now we have some red formatting. So what this means is that we track the senior lien, the DSC means debt service coverage, the all-in debt service coverage. So this is the debt service coverage requirement that we need to meet every year. And I believe for the city, we need the debt service coverage of 1.1 times. And with the 0% rate increases, you can see that in those later years, starting in 2024, we're starting to dip below the requirement. And the formatting shows red being that the city is not able to meet that requirement. And if we're coming down to these graphs, the very first graph that I want to show you is the operating fund graph. So the operating fund graph shows the projected ending fund balance for the city's water fund every year. And without any rate increases, since I zeroed out all the rate increases, we can see that, well, 2020 is fine, 2021 is fine, 2022, 2023, and then we can see that starting in 2024, the blue bar is below this black line. So the black line is our target. So we typically have a 2 to 3 month operating reserve or O&M reserve. So these would be the restricted cash we want to hold in case in the future year something happen, if we have a drought that we need to dip below, so that we have a little bit of a reserve that we can work with. So starting in 2024, without any rate increases, we're not able to meet our target. And then starting 27 through 2030, it's actually, the fund balance is actually negative. It's just currently not showing in the model. So we know that it's not sustainable to not have any rate increases, which makes sense because we've included different inflation factors on the cost side, and we also have pretty big capital needs as well. So not having any rate increases would not be able to cover all of our costs in the next 10 years. And then the next thing that we like to do is to clear out these rate increases. And what does that do is the model is actually going to calculate the rate increases itself. So it's going to look at every single year. Is it going to meet the revenue requirement? If not, what are the rate increases needed? And we typically call it the just-in-time rate increases. So let me update that so you can see that then we have different rate increases in those later years. These rate increases are typically bumpy. So that's what we did to smooth out the rate increases and end up coming with a plan of a 4 and 4.5% every year, just so that we can better plan for those rate increases in order to satisfy all of our rate revenue requirements while still able to fund all of our projects. So this is a very quick overview of the financial planning models that we're using. And I'm going to flip back to the presentation, and hopefully it gives you a little bit idea of how the model is working, how interactive it is, and how the process works.
Thanks, Siwan. And there'll be questions at the end. We'll make sure that there's time for questions.
Yeah.
So
And
now that you're, oh, go ahead.
Oh, no, sorry. Go ahead, Carol.
I was just going to say, so you've seen these tables now, you've had a look at them. So what we're showing in the next couple slides is just where we ended up and what we presented to council regarding the preferred plan or the proposed plans. So on the water financial plan, we're proposing that 4% rate increase in 2021 and 4.5% thereafter, with a $15 a month capital improvement fee that will go exclusively towards those capital needs for water. And there's the next slide shows us those same graphs that Siwan just showed you. We have the same thing for sewer. So on the sewer side, the financial outlook is similar. We have 4.5% rate increases proposed up into a point, and then they drop from there. These are always dynamic, so they are going to change over time, but this is the projection for where we are now. After we go through that whole financial planning process, we have those few more steps. So cost of service and rate design are the following steps. We take those industry accepted approaches in the cost of service process, and we look at annual costs and divide those across the customer classes based on how your customers use the system. So residential customers use water a certain way. There's a lot of irrigation. Commercial customers use water a certain way. So based on those characteristics, everything is proportional. So we want to allocate costs proportionally. Once we have those costs allocated, we can move to the actual rate design. So those are the actual rates that are on the bills that customers receive. During this rate design process, we kept the rate structures the same, except for an update to the outside city customers. So you have a few water customers that are served outside the city, and we updated a multiplier to be 1.4 times. This is actually not anything new. You've actually charged a multiplier to your outside city water customers. So we wanted to just maintain that, but make it consistent for those customers. And we can talk about that a little later if you wish. And then we have that $15 a month capital improvement fee for a 3/4 inch meter customer that was proposed. And then finally, we also worked on the sewer side to make sure that the sewer rates would meet those future revenue requirements. Here's an example of that water capital improvement fee. I mentioned that it would be a $15 a month fee per 3/4 inch meter. We've actually looked at different meter sizes that are inside the city, and we've proposed to scale that $15 a month fee because it is for capital improvements, and capital improvements provide a certain amount of capacity in the water system. Therefore, larger meter sizes require more capacity in the system and would pay a multiple of that $15 a month fee. The equivalent meter schedule is there right in the middle of that table. So a 3/4 inch meter and a 5/8 inch meter is called one equivalent meter or one equivalent customer. If you have a 2-inch meter, you're actually 5.3 times a 3/4 inch meter. We use that schedule to develop the proposed capital improvement fee. This next slide just gives you an example of how we could calculate or estimate customer bills once we have that proposed rate schedule. So if we're looking at an inside city customer, no matter how much they use, from 0 gallons to 12,000 gallons a month, and we know that we'll talk about this in a second also, but currently your bills are on a quarterly basis, but we're moving to monthly, so we presented this information on a monthly basis. The table shows different usages per month, what the current bill is on a monthly basis, and then what the proposed bill would be. We then added in that capital improvement fee because it is a fee that doesn't vary based on water usage. And then we calculated the total proposed bill. You can see the difference here that even without a drop of water used, the bill would go up by $14.71. So that reflects the capital improvement fee of $15. There's actually a discount here for the on a monthly bill basis versus a quarterly bill. So you can see also from this table that we've highlighted a winter average for a typical customer, an annual average of 6,000 gallons a month, and then a summer average that includes irrigation. So that's the 11,000 gallon customer. So a customer that uses 11,000 gallons a month in the summer would see an increase in their monthly bill by $16.16. Now those are all the rates and fees and one part of the rate study. Another part are connection fees. Connection fees are those one-time charges to brand new customers or new development where they are purchasing capacity in the system. So we wanted to make sure that growth or new customers are paying their fair share of those costs that are incurred to serve new customers. It's a pretty simple formula, but there's a lot of assumptions that go into this calculation. The formula is simply the system value. So the value of the water system or sewer system, we look at the fixed assets. Then we look at any new growth-related capital improvements that need to be in place to serve new customers. We add those two values together to get the total dollar amount. Then we divide that dollar amount by how many single-family equivalents can be served by the system. That gives us a fee, a connection fee in dollars per single-family equivalent. And a typical residential customer with a 3/4 inch meter is one single-family equivalent. The next table shows us what those results came out to be. Like I said, there were a lot of assumptions that go into a connection fee calculation. The first assumption would be, what value do we use for the system? There are 4 different values that you could use to estimate the value of your water system. The first one is original cost. Then we could take out depreciation and use net book value. We could also add a price escalator to get the value of the system in today's dollars, which is RCN or replacement cost new. And then we could also take today's value and subtract depreciation, which is RCNLD or replacement cost less depreciation. That value is actually the most common method of valuing assets for connection fee purposes. It is because it will charge a new customer for the value of the water in today's value, less any amount of wear and tear that's been accounted for in the system. So that's the replacement cost, less depreciation. One other difference during this rate study is that the raw water rights had never really been accounted for in your water system connection fee. So the value of those water rights were not recouped over all these years, and the city has spent a lot of time and investment in securing those long-term water supplies for your customers. So that has value, and new customers should buy into that value. We used a study that the Utilities Department had commissioned for this purpose, so that water rights study determined the value of your water rights, and we incorporated that into this calculation. That gave us the much higher water resources connection fee that we believe is to be charged to new customers. So that gives us that $17,504 fee that we're showing right here. In total, a brand new customer that would receive water service and sewer service, they would pay $21,346, and that's compared to the current or the previous fee of $6,960. That's also a lot to take in for one part of the study, but I'm going to ask Peter to continue with the presentation.
I'm gonna close this out here so that we have a little bit of time for some questions. Keep in mind that what we're presenting to you right now was presented over the course of, I think, 5 or 6 council meetings and probably a grand total of about 3 hours worth of presentation. So we're jamming through a lot of information really quickly, and we understand that. So what does it all mean? We'll go to the next slide. First step is just really a comparison of where we're at from a water and sewer bill. So if you look all the way to the left, Englewood is today at the lowest by far of the 13 surveyed areas, 4648. With the increases as proposed, we become second lowest at 6069, but we're still below the average significantly. You can see the average line there. And if you look at we're talking about our neighbors, so Denver, Lakewood, Longmont, Aurora. Next slide, please. Connection fees, same thing. Connection fees were way low. The way we've done the revision, we've proposed the new ones, and you can see we're now fourth lowest out of the group surveyed. And so you can see that while we've made a significant change and a significant increase, we're still on the lower end of that and very comparable to Boulder, Lakewood, Aurora, Castle Rock. Next slide, please. The final recommendation that we came through in November was we recommended a $15 capital investment fee, a 4% increase, align the multiplier 1.4, and then the new connection fees that Carol talked about. On the sewer fund, it's a 4.5% increase and the new connection fees. So that was what was recommended, became part of the budget process, and ultimately adopted. The next set of things that we're working on this year, and I'll stop on this slide, Siwan, is we're transitioning to monthly billing. We did a presentation to council last night on that. That will be occurring in April. We're also developing a customer assistance program, and we've got that linked up with Arapahoe County, and that will be widely advertised, and our citizens will be notified the access to that if they're experiencing hardship in paying their bill. And then we're also updating the sewer outside City Multiplier. Today it's 1.05, so this is for a connector district. And our initial analysis suggests that it should be around 1.2, which results in a net increase in revenue to the sewer fund of about $2 million a year. And so what that does is, in the long term, that limits the amount of debt that we need to issue in order to continue to make the investments in South Platte Renew that are needed. Additionally, we're evaluating external contracts. We have a provision in our water agreements that allow us to do what's called an appraisal-based pricing. We've initiated that process, and we'll be working through that process over the next several months. And we believe that that will result in updating that pricing to reflect the value of water today as opposed to where we're at right now. And then ultimately, we'll be looking at evaluation of the sewer service for those customers within the City of Englewood municipal boundary, and the largest of which is the South Englewood Sanitation District. And so we'll be looking at how that district interfaces with the city as itself, and what makes sense for how we can ensure that our customers are receiving the appropriate value. And full disclosure, I live in Englewood and I live in South Englewood Sanitation District. So I say that all the time because I just want people to know that we're doing that anyways, but I actually live in that district. And so we are going to stop there. That was a lot of information, and I want to just turn it back over to the committee, and we can dive into some of the details, or it's an overwhelming amount of information.
Thank you so much for your time and for putting so much preparation into these materials. It was a lot of information, but it was really fascinating just to see the process that you have walked through over the last year. So thank you so much for being here, all of you. With that, I'm going to see if any members of the committee have any questions.
I have a few.
Go ahead.
Okay. First, I love this presentation, and for Santec, I love your model. I'm kind of an Excel geek, and I'd like to use a template like that in my own practice. So I'm impressed. I guess for Director Van Ry, with the transition to monthly billing, I know we're minimizing the opportunity cost with people who have defaulted on their payments. How many people do you think are behind in paying their utility bill at any given time? Like, how will this be mitigated by switching to monthly billing?
So we haven't pulled this data in a few months, but when we were looking at this midway through the pandemic, and the arrears, I believe, was somewhere on the order of, or I think it was around $200,000. So what we were actually kind of surprised about was it was not as significant as we thought the pandemic may have caused it to be. We will go back and re-update that information, because that's a question that we've been monitoring and just haven't looked at in a few months. So we can definitely do that. But I can tell you, midway through the pandemic, we were not. I was actually kind of surprised at how little it was, unless Carol has updated information.
I do. Through February of this year, we were about a little over $100,000 in arrears, and that was 195 accounts, I believe. Well, that's where.
How many accounts do we have in the city? Ballpark?
3,000? Is that right? No, 11.
For water, no, 11,000.
11.
Yeah, 11,000. Sorry. Don't let me answer ballpark.
Thank you. Chelsea and Josh, I'm going to keep going unless you guys. Okay, I don't want to monopolize the Q&A session. And how many customers do you think will benefit from the customer assistance program?
Peter, now use your answer.
What was my answer?
3,000.
Oh, 3,000. Well, so we did an analysis based on. We did a presentation a few months back where we looked at the demographics of the city of Englewood, and we got into the median income and how that relates to setting a standard. And we set the recommendation from council was to set the standard at 250% of federal poverty level. Mm-hmm. And at that point in time, we anticipated from a cost perspective, if there was a full 100% participation in that program from the people that could, it would result, I think, in an annual cost of around $580,000. And so it's a significant amount of money, but it's not in the millions to the point where it really throws things out of whack. And again, there's no program across the country that has 100% participation level. They're typically, 50 is a really, really good program if you're at 50%.
Yeah, I think it's very socially responsible for the city to accrue costs of up to $580,000 to make sure that everyone has the water they need. Yeah. I feel like I had another question, but I didn't write it down. So I'll turn it back over to Chelsea and Josh.
Great. We can come back to you if it comes.
And I only have one question on what Suzanne was saying about the move to monthly billing. Have you guys looked at incorporated automatic billing? I'm one of those that always have to get the second notice to remember to pay my bills. So automatic billing, I think, would alleviate some of, challenges like that.
On our flyer, we have the link to autopay, which you can set up. It is we're trying to steer as many people to that as possible, and we think that with this transition, it'll be just another opportunity to get people to do that.
Perfect.
And right now, the way we have it set up is we absorb the charge that goes along with it, and so we want to incentivize people to use that approach because we think it's actually better for the customers. So right now, the charge for doing that we actually just absorb into the fund.
Perfect.
And all of you will actually be receiving a flyer sometime this week, which will be a nice multicolor, bright flyer that will talk you through your transition from monthly billing or from quarterly billing to monthly billing.
I'm thrilled with the transition. I mean, my household has no issues paying 3 months of expenses 4 times a year, but I'd rather pay once a month. It just stings the pocketbook a little bit less. I'm excited.
Yeah. Well, and part of it was, there was a strategy to it, because that $15 capital investment fee is a hit to people.
Mhm.
And so to have that come as a $45 hit every 3 months versus something that people can, yes, it's going to go up, and it's going to be more in that month if you were to look at quarterly versus monthly, but it's easier to budget for. And so that was part of the strategy, was to help our customers make that adjustment. And keep in mind that chart that I showed you that shows just how affordable water and sewer service is in the city of Englewood as compared to our neighbors that are immediately adjacent to us.
I really appreciate how many customer considerations were included in your presentation, which I think is incredibly important. And the question I was waiting for to the end was, where do we fall in relation to our municipal neighbors? So I loved that slide at the end and kind of understanding where we're going to chart, which was very helpful. I believe the slides was based on 2021 numbers. We would have no sense of what maybe other municipalities would be like at the end of the decade. Is that correct? Kind of where we'll fall
actually,
by the end?
It was actually 2020, right? It was done in 2020. But what we did is we put our 2021 proposed against all those 2020. So assuming that many of those other entities have some amount of an annual increase that they would have implemented, all it does is it further highlights the affordability of the services provided by Englewood.
And do you anticipate that by the final numbers based within this master plan in 2030, that all things would kind of remain equal as far as where we will end up in relation to other municipalities? Does that question make sense?
Yeah, well, that's the reason for the 10-year financial planning outlook to this, and why that model. We have a 10-year version, which you saw tonight. We have a 20-year version as well, and the whole point of that is to look at it annually, and to look at our master plans on a comprehensive basis every 5 years. Because that master planning information that I first shared with you, that was if we had the perfect situation where we could fund everything, that's what we would say we would do. And then we plugged it into the model and basically broke it, because you can't fund all of that. And so that's where we had to go through and say, all right, well, then we need to defer some of these. We need to work on maybe we bring some of these projects and programs in-house as opposed to contracting them out. And so we went through that iterative process through the summer with Stantec and staff to get down to something that was reasonably affordable, accomplished the goals, and predictable. And that's why you see that level 4.5% over the next several years. One of the other things that we're doing is we're looking at these other contracts and these other outside services that we have, because there is potential, we think, for additional revenue there that could help do one of two things: either fund the stuff that we deferred, or help to maybe limit that increase so that instead of 4.5%, maybe it goes in a couple of years to 4% or something like that. What we don't want to do is we don't want to get into a situation where we go to 0% increases for 5 years, and then all of a sudden you see what happens to the financial planning. We start to get really close on our debt service coverage, and then we have to catch up again. That's been a lot of the challenge that we've been facing. The last time water rates were increased, I believe, was 2012. And so when you're looking at 9 years of no rate increases, you spend all those years trying to catch up, and it becomes difficult from a financial hit perspective.
No, I appreciate that elaboration. Thank you so much. One of the other components of your presentation that stood out to me was the program for the 50 to 70-year water main replacement, and
Yes.
establishing that timeline. And if you're thinking about a lot of our infrastructure right now, as I believe you said, from the 60s, we're kind of right on track for those replacements. But obviously that's a heavy toll all at once. And I think a situation that many kind of elements of the city are finding themselves in, and this need for infrastructure updates. Was a program like that on that kind of timeline, and that be able to anticipate those replacements in existence before this process that you went through in the last year, or is that a new program?
For the city of Englewood, it's a new program. So the philosophy, from what we can tell, the philosophy was to really work to keep rates low, which is a philosophy a number of utilities across the country had taken for many, many years. And how you keep rates low is you don't do that annual investment. You say, all right, well, we'll put that off another year. We'll put that off another year. We'll put that off another year, which works for many, many years. The problem is then you get that pile of deferred maintenance that's now a big mountain that has to be scaled. And that's where we're trying to balance a reasonable approach to addressing that deferred maintenance while not going to customers and saying, well, now we need to raise your bills so astronomically that it's unaffordable. And so I think what you saw through the presentations is we keep Englewood really still very, very affordable. And we have a strategy to really address some of those longer term deferred maintenance issues that it'll take us a while to cycle through. That 50 to 70 year range is an industry standard. That's a target from an asset management perspective for that the industry has established that we're starting on. So we're going to have elements of the system that are 120 years old by the time they get their first round of replacement. But you got to start somewhere.
Wonderful. My last question is just of the, and if it was in the presentation and I missed it, I apologize somewhere. But of the elements that were not funded in this plan, the main kind of projects or priorities that maybe you would want additional funding for depending on additional revenue or different streams of revenue, what's the top of that list? What do you see as the biggest need that right now doesn't have funding?
I think there's a couple that I would say that we had to reduce the funding level on. One is that water line replacement. The other one is the lead service line replacement. That is a wild card that's kind of that's out there for us in terms of, one, understanding the true scope of the issue, two, the regulatory landscape as to when that type of requirement is going to be imposed on a city the size of Englewood. So like I said, Denver had to deal with this because they start with the large cities first, and then they ratchet down to the smaller cities. Well, Englewood was built the same time as Denver, and so we're in the same. The materials were generally the same that were used during a lot of that development frame, which is why we have so many lead service lines. We initially looked at funding that to more aggressively, and it really it drove the rates just to a point where they were unsustainable. And so what we'd be looking to do is looking at ways to either utilize systems like, if you may have heard that we secured the ability to apply for what's called WIFIA funding, which is Water Infrastructure Financing and Innovation Act, which are really favorable low interest loans through the federal government that have really favorable payback periods, really low interest rates, and give us a lot of access to capital today that we can essentially pay back over the next 40 plus years. And so that might be a way to really start to attack those issues. But really, I think that's the one that is somewhat out there that we think we should over the next couple years really define a good program for addressing, and we're still working on it.
And with the WIFIA, we say we've qualified, but we haven't actually.
Right. So the WIFIA process, you do what's called a letter of interest, and so we put together a letter of interest, and we had $30 million of water capital projects in that letter and $15 million of sewer. And the way WIFIA is, they fund 49%, we have to fund the other 51%. And so you basically double those numbers, and that's the value of the capital. So 60 million on the water side and 30 million on the wastewater side. And then once we were notified that we were one of the selected cities to be able to be invited to apply. And so we've met a couple times with the EPA's underwriter. with finance. Jackie has been on a couple of these calls, as well as our bond counsel and our financial advisor to help us work through this application process. Stantec has done a number of these applications across the country, so they are providing us their services as well to help us with that application. And essentially, our application is due in July. The great thing about that program is it's almost like a letter of credit. So if we get approved for $30 million of water, we could wait and we have 5 years to draw on it. So if we don't draw on it for the first 4 years, and we draw on it on year 5, we don't start accruing interest or anything until year 5. And so there are a number of really favorable terms with that program that I think really help us in the situation that we're in try to, again, address that deferred maintenance.
That's great. Thank you so much for walking through that. I have one last question.
Sure.
With these updates, with the lead service line and the new water mains, do you anticipate there being an improvement in the water quality? Things like taste and visibility and all of that. How does that play into this?
Great question. And that's I'm on my local next door, and I see it come up every now and then, the question about the taste. So from a water quality perspective, quality is an important thing to consider, is that we meet quality standards. So we meet drinking water quality standards. So what you're referring to is more water aesthetic. And so it's the taste and the odor and taste and odor and hardness. And so we are not exactly sure yet what inputs are driving that to be where it is today. So what I mean by that is we want to systematically look at ways of changing our system operation today to see if we can have an improvement effect on the water quality without spending a whole bunch of money replacing large parts of the system in order to do that. One of the biggest things that we're looking at right now is, like I said early on in the master planning part, we get water from City Ditch, which collects water right at Chatfield. And so once it gets in City Ditch, it's conveyed directly to the Allen plant. So that is one source of supply for us. Our other source of supply is at Union. Well, when you're in the summer in July and the Platte is at low flow and there's barely any water in the Platte, that's tough source water quality as compared to water coming out of Chatfield. So what we're looking at is how we utilize our water rights portfolio in order to shift more of that water source from coming from the Chatfield area, where it's a better water source quality, and then the idea is that maybe that will have some kind of a positive effect on our longer term taste and odor. We are looking at softening as a system. That you saw that in one of the master plan projects. Softening is something that's not an inexpensive project if you do it for a system-wide water system. However, given the hardness of the water in Englewood, we think that would be an area that really would benefit customers, is if we could get that kind of a system in place. That's something that's actually anticipated under that WIFIA funding loan. That was one of those projects. We are also, one of the other things I want to do is do a graduated analysis of our distribution system, because I hear from people how bad the water quality is, and then I hear from other people I don't have any issue with the water quality at all. So for me personally, I get water. I drink Englewood water out of my refrigerator every day. I don't have any issue with it. It really doesn't have a real issue for me. I also know that all my interior piping of my house is copper, and a lot of people have galvanized or much older piping systems. And so there's a number of factors that could be driving this for people. And what we want to do is we want to systematically rule out or rule in things that will improve that over time. That was a bit of a long answer to a complex question.
I appreciate it. Thank you so much. Any other final thoughts or questions from the committee?
I'll just add, you can add me to Group B. We find the water perfectly palatable, but we know that that's not universal across the city, and our house was also renovated less than 10 years ago. So, so we advise council and directors on the implementation and development of the budget, except for capital improvement. We don't advise on those areas yet. I mean, briefly, because I know we're past time. Is there anything non-capital you want us to have on our minds as we exit this meeting?
You know, not that's a good question. I haven't been asked that question, obviously.
Good enough.
I can't think of anything off the top of my head. I think the thing that this is a piece that I don't understand is the interface of the board that I work through is the Water and Sewer Board, and so they provide that kind of feedback. And so how to complement their feedback with the feedback from this board to council, I think would be anything that helps supports the more proactive programmatic approach that we've outlined in the master plan is really something I think will help us longer term. I think it's really helping people understand that water and sewer service in Englewood, when you compare to our neighbors, is pretty affordable, and there is a strategy to trying to improve a number of these issues that people have been upset about for many years. And I think any amount that we can help our community understand that more, I think would hopefully help them, feel a little bit better about the direction we're headed. So maybe it's outreach.
Okay. I think that's a great answer.
Thank you.
Well, thank you, all three of you, so much for your time. This has been a great first introduction for the Budget Advisory Committee to utilities, and we hope you come back sometime.
I would love to come back and maybe on an annual basis or whatever the committee deems appropriate. But like I said, as we continue to tackle more and more of these issues longer term, it'd be great to provide ongoing updates.
Wonderful. All right.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Good night.
Bye.
All right. So we are at 6:37, but we have Councilmember Ward with us, which we're very excited about. And I'm just going to go ahead and pass the floor to you.
So I'm not going to take a lot of time. I just asked if I could appear in front of this board tonight to say thank you and to officially give my goodbye to the members that I've served with for quite some time now. I do have a special shout out for Jenny. She taught me most of what I know about the budget, and she's been patient no matter what kind of cockamamie question I've asked over the years. So I know Jenny's not the type of person who cares too much for public recognition, but thanks for working with me all this time and teaching me the things that I needed to know that have made me more ready to join the ranks of council. And thank you, everyone else on the Budget Advisory Committee for serving. And that's pretty much all I have to say tonight. So thank you. Sorry about being late too.
Thank you, Steve. Those are kind words. I really appreciate it. Wishing you all the best.
Thanks, Steve.
Yeah. Thank you so much for how much you've invested into this committee. You've made it, really shaped it into what it is. We're glad to see you get called up to the majors, and we have learned so much from you. I have learned so much from you, so I really appreciate you.
And keep in mind, I'm available anytime. So any of you have any questions, why'd you do that, 7 years ago, feel free to ask.
Wonderful. All right. Let me find my agenda here. I think we can move on. Does anyone have anything for members' choice?
I do not.
Nothing for me.
The only thing, just to follow up from our conversation at the beginning of the meeting, Jenny, is just clarity around what kind of openings we have on this committee for the next round of applicants. So transitioning Josh, at least I don't know if it's in official records or just on the website, if it's just a typo, as a regular member. And then if we have 2 regular member openings, both for Suzanne, if she wants to continue on with us.
Yes, I'm reapplying.
Okay, wonderful. And then the vacancy for Steve, but then also if we are approved for the alternate member, if that can be added to the openings for this round of applications, it'd be great to just do all 3 at once.
Yes, and it will be 4, but knowing that Suzanne is going to reapply, we will have Suzanne plus 3. So there will be an addition of 4 new members, 2 new members and 2 alternates. Suzanne is one of them, which is confusing.
But
So it will be
Because
Joel, Josh, myself, assuming I'm reappointed, a brand new member, and then an alternate, right?
Two alternates.
So we have two
alternates. Okay.
I think our request was only for 1 alternate.
One alternate? Okay. Then I'll make sure that we add for 1 alternate.
I think
I'm good with that. 2 was new to me. That wasn't familiar to me, but I don't feel strongly.
I think 1 is sufficient.
Okay.
And Councilmember Russell?
Thank you. I think that it was 1 alternate and it did get approved. I mean, when it was just kind of an automatic for all those requests when we voted on that. So I'm pretty certain that there is 1 alternate.
Great. Thanks for that clarification.
Mm-hmm.
Yes, thank you very much. And then so whatever the feedback loop is on that, so that gets on the posting would be lovely.
Great.
And that's all I had. I'm glad we got to hear from utilities. I learned a lot.
Yeah, that was a good presentation.
Okay. Well, thanks for hanging in there with us a little late tonight, everyone. Have a great rest of your week. We will
Thanks, everyone. See you next month.
Thank
Take care, all.
Bye.
Bye.
Night.